The countryside has long been romanticized as a peaceful escape from the chaos of urban life. Rolling hills, sprawling farmlands, and quaint villages paint a picture of serenity and safety. But beneath this tranquil veneer lies a darker reality that many rural inhabitants know all too well. Today we're exploring true countryside horror stories that remind us that isolation, while peaceful, can quickly become terrifying when things go wrong. What makes rural horror particularly unsettling is the isolation factor. In cities, help is typically minutes away. In the countryside, it could be hours before another person passes by. Cell service is often spotty, neighbors are miles apart, and that picturesque isolation becomes your worst enemy when danger strikes. Our first story comes from northern Montana, where a family of 4 purchased a farmhouse on 30 acres of land in 2018. Sarah and Michael Johnson had always dreamed of raising their 2 young children away from city life. The property they found seemed perfect. A renovated 19th century farmhouse with modern amenities, surrounded by fields and forests. The previous owner, an elderly widow, had sold the property at a surprisingly low price after living there for over 40 years. The Johnsons didn't question their good fortune. They were simply grateful to afford their dream home. Little did they know that the locals avoided that property for a reason. Their first month was idyllic. The kids loved exploring the land. Sarah started a garden, and Michael commuted to his job in the nearest town, about 30 minutes away. But as autumn approached, strange occurrences began to disrupt their peaceful existence. It started with livestock on neighboring farms becoming agitated whenever the sun set. Dogs would bark incessantly in the direction of the Johnson property. Sarah initially dismissed it as wildlife passing through, perhaps deer or coyotes. But then the sounds began. Every night around 3 a.m., they would hear what sounded like a woman's sobbing, emanating from the edge of their property where the forest began. The first few times, Michael went out to investigate, thinking someone might be injured or lost. He found nothing. The sound would stop as soon as he approached the tree line, only to resume once he returned to the house. They installed motion-activated cameras around the property. The sobbing continued, but the cameras captured nothing. After 2 weeks of disturbed sleep and growing anxiety, Sarah contacted the previous owner's daughter to ask if they'd ever experienced anything similar. The daughter was reluctant to speak at first. Eventually, she revealed that in 1962, a young woman had disappeared while hiking in those woods. Her body was never found, but her belongings were discovered at the edge of what was now the Johnsons' property. The sobbing had started shortly after her disappearance and had been a regular occurrence for decades. The previous owner had learned to live with it. Most locals knew the story and avoided the area, especially at night. The Johnsons were skeptical of supernatural explanations and suspected someone might be playing an elaborate prank. They contacted local authorities who searched the property thoroughly but found nothing suspicious. Officers stayed overnight, and remarkably the sobbing stopped during their presence. As soon as the police left, the phenomenon returned. But now the sobbing was accompanied by light footsteps on their porch and occasional tapping on windows. Their children began to report seeing a sad lady standing at the edge of the forest during the day. The final straw came in November when Sarah woke up to find wet footprints leading from the front door to their bedroom. The doors had been locked, the alarm system was armed, and the cameras had captured nothing. The family moved out the next day. The property remains unsold, with locals referring to it as the crying woman's land. What makes this story particularly unsettling is the consistency of the phenomenon over decades, witnessed by multiple unrelated residents and neighbors. Whether it's a paranormal occurrence or an elaborate hoax that's been maintained for over 60 years, the effect on those who've lived there is undeniably real. Our second story takes us to rural Kentucky, where a more tangible but equally terrifying event unfolded in 2016. James Harmon, a 34-year-old park ranger, lived alone in a cabin near the state park where he worked. His nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and he enjoyed the solitude after days spent dealing with tourists. One winter night during a heavy snowstorm, James was awakened by his dog growling at the bedroom door. Thinking an animal might have sought shelter on his porch, he grabbed his flashlight and went to investigate. What he found was far more disturbing. Human footprints in the fresh snow, circling his entire cabin multiple times. The prints didn't lead to or from anywhere. They simply formed concentric circles around his home, as if someone had been pacing around it for hours. James immediately called the local sheriff's department, but the snow was falling so heavily that it would be hours before anyone could reach him. He locked every door and window, loaded his hunting rifle, and waited in his living room with his dog.
As the night progressed, he began to hear scratching sounds at various points around the cabin. First at one window, then at a door, then at another window, as if someone was methodically testing every possible entry point. His dog remained on high alert, growling at each new sound. Around 4 a.m., the scratching stopped. James cautiously looked out a window and saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible through the falling snow. The figure appeared to be watching the cabin. James raised his rifle, ready to defend himself if necessary, but the figure remained stationary. As dawn approached, the figure retreated into the forest. When officers finally arrived later that morning, they found the footprints mostly filled in by new snow, but confirmed they had indeed circled the entire cabin multiple times. They also discovered something James hadn't noticed in the dark: shallow scratches on every window and door, as if someone had been testing them with a knife or similar tool. Despite an extensive search, no suspect was ever identified. The prevailing theory was that it was either a drifter seeking shelter or potentially someone with more sinister intentions who was deterred by James's vigilance. James installed a comprehensive security system and never experienced another incident. But he no longer enjoys the solitude quite as much as he once did. The third account comes from a farming community in Nebraska, where an entire town experienced a collective nightmare in the summer of 2020. Millbrook is a small agricultural town with about 500 residents, surrounded by corn and wheat fields that stretch for miles in every direction. In late July, residents began to report an unusual phenomenon: strange lights moving through the crops at night. Initially dismissed as farm equipment or local teenagers, the sightings became more frequent and widespread. Multiple residents from different parts of town reported seeing the same thing: orbs of light that moved with apparent purpose through the fields, always between midnight and 3 a.m. Local farmer Thomas Reeves decided to investigate after spotting the lights crossing his cornfield. The next morning, he found a perfect circle, approximately 30 feet in diameter, where the corn had been flattened. The stalks weren't broken or damaged. They were simply bent at the base, all in the same clockwise direction. Within a week, 7 more identical circles appeared in fields around Millbrook. Wildlife began to exhibit strange behavior. Birds abandoned the area, and livestock became increasingly agitated, particularly at night. Several farmers reported their animals breaking through fences to flee from something unseen. The situation escalated when 3 teenage boys decided to camp out near one of the circles to see if they could witness the phenomenon up close. Around 2 a.m., they called 911 in a panic, claiming they were surrounded by lights and could hear what sounded like whispering in an unfamiliar language. By the time police arrived, the boys were gone. Their camping equipment remained, but there was no sign of the teenagers themselves. A search party was organized, and 36 hours later, the boys were found walking along a highway 20 miles away. They had no recollection of what had happened after they placed the 911 call, and all 3 exhibited the same unusual symptoms: elevated heart rates, dilated pupils, and a strange rash on their arms that disappeared within days. Authorities investigated possible explanations ranging from pranksters to mass hysteria to environmental contaminants. The FBI even briefly became involved due to concerns about potential bioterrorism targeting agricultural areas. Soil and crop samples were tested, but revealed nothing unusual. After approximately 3 weeks, the phenomena ceased as suddenly as they had begun. The circles remained in the fields until harvest, but the lights never returned. The community was left with no explanation for what they had collectively experienced. Some researchers later suggested that the incident might have been caused by ball lightning or other rare atmospheric phenomena,
potentially triggered by the unusual weather patterns that summer. Others pointed to the possibility of hallucinogenic fungal spores from the crops themselves. But no theory fully explained all aspects of what the residents experienced, especially the memory loss in the three teenagers. What makes countryside horror so effective is that it plays on our primal fears of isolation and vulnerability. In urban settings, we're surrounded by infrastructure and other people. Potent sound